So, picking back up on our last day of our section on social dilemmas and collective action. A few updates and reminders. Your outline 13 is now graded. Activity 6 and 7 are in the process of being graded. They will be graded by the end of this week. So, hopefully by Friday, but that might extend until Sunday. But by next week, you will definitely know where you stand in terms of your final grade. Again, if you're happy with your grade, if you're satisfied with where it is, then you are finished with the course, in which case, congratulations. And if not, you can complete activity 8, and that's more self guided. I recommend that make sure that you look at it at least like a week in advance, just so that you have plenty of time to do the reading and watch the videos and complete the activity. I'll make the activity available next week so that you have plenty of time to look at it and get started on that if that's something that you would like to do. Your quiz 7 is due this Friday at 11:59 p.m. You will, like the last time, have 2 chances to complete the quiz. And so that seemed to be helpful last time. And I figure, well, we're heading into the end of the semester, so why not? Also, make sure to watch the supplementary videos and complete the reading for this week. So, solving social dilemmas. So, we've asked ourselves throughout the section, but also kind of throughout this entire semester is, why do people cooperate? How do we address, particularly in this instant, how do we address these social dilemmas or these collective action problems that we've discussed so far? So, there are three broad classes of solutions that we're going to cover today, and they're motivational, structural, and strategic. And so these proposed solutions to social dilemmas, um, like I said, are divided into these three broad categories. And these categories are based on whether the solutions assume actors to be self interested and whether the structure of the situation can be changed. So, the rules of the game, so to speak. Some motivational solutions, for example, assume that actors are not completely self interested and give some weight to the outcomes of others, whereas strategic solutions assume self interested actors, and structural solutions involve changing the situation or the rules of the game. So, first, we're going to discuss some motivational solutions. And here we might ask ourselves, do individuals take their partner's outcomes into account when making a decision? And are actors as self interested as we may assume? So, when we're talking about some motivational solutions, in terms of how to get people to cooperate, how to solve the free rider problem, all of these issues that come along with the different social dilemmas that we've discussed. Um, Again, there's these three broad categories of solutions that have been discussed in terms of addressing these particular issues. The motivational solutions, the first being what is called social value orientations. And so this doesn't necessarily provide a roadmap or a very specific solution to social dilemmas and collective action problems, more so providing some insight. So, understanding that different people have different, what we call social value orientations. And so, what research has found is that people tend to they found these different categories in terms of social value orientation. So, how are you kind of oriented towards the world? Are you cooperative, competitive, altruistic, or individualistic? Those who are deemed cooperative are this would be described as individuals act as to maximize joint outcomes. And now the competitive type might also act to promote and maximize joint outcomes, but not necessarily. But there is this competitive component that differentiates them from the cooperative types. And then there are those who are altruistic, meaning that they maximize their partner's outcome without regard for their own outcome. And finally, there's an individualistic type, meaning that they tend to maximize their own outcome without any concern or regard, or at least little concern or regard for the outcomes of their partners or the outcomes of others. And so, research in numerous countries has found that most individuals can be classified as either cooperators, competitors, or individualists. Again, kind of that problem of altruism. And this isn't necessarily to say that there are no altruistic people. Perhaps the issue is more in measuring altruism. And are we looking at altruistic motives or are we looking at altruistic behaviors? And here they are observing behavior, but for the most part, they are concerned with kind of those motivations. Like, what is your social value orientation towards the world? Are you a more cooperative person, a competitive person, or are you more individualistic? So these are looking at more of those like intrinsic motivations, instead of like, of course, looking at behavior, but they're very much focused on those like more intrinsic motivations, and how people tend to operate in the world and orient themselves toward the world. So perhaps the issue is the difficulty in measuring altruism. There are a few concepts like this throughout sociology and psychology. Like in psychology, for example, one of the concepts they have difficulty measuring is, I believe, neuroticism is notoriously pretty difficult to measure, and to define in a way that captures the full range of what is possible, in terms of neuroticism. What does that mean without making it too general and too broad, but making it specific enough to be able to like measure and count in a fairly accurate way? So it's kind of like that. It's difficult to measure. So that could be it. Or perhaps people are just fairly self-interested, um, regardless of their willingness to cooperate and maximize the benefits of those around them. But this work has shown, this research in these areas have shown that individuals with different social value orientations tend to behave differently when faced with the same objective gain. And so when we're looking at social value orientations, we're really looking at, these different ways of describing people, these different categories, in order to give us some insight as to why people cooperate, why people don't cooperate. It can help provide some insight into maybe how that can be influenced or when is it taught. Um, is it something that's taught? Is it something that we're born with? Is it something that can be influenced or shaped in some way and across particular situations? And one thing that they found though is that they do tend to be particularly stable over time. And although you see certain clusters of these social value orientations in, maybe in certain cultures or certain countries, um, it is not something that is, you know, you each one isn't something that's unique to like a particular area or particular culture. You do see this variation, within cultures as well and within countries. And so, although you see certain clusters like across areas, across cultures and countries, you also tend to see similar variations within that culture and within those countries. So it's relatively stable over time. And this, again, doesn't necessarily provide a solution, but it does provide some insight into why these social dilemmas exist, why they occur, and perhaps why we see different patterns of cooperation across different groups of individuals. The second solution that has been proposed or discussed is communication. So they found that, this particular approach, um, is so they ask what particular features in the situation or environment, rather than an individual's personality, so to speak, affect the way individuals give others' outcomes. One of the most robust findings in the literature is the positive effects of communication rates on cooperation. And they found that when individuals are given the chance to talk with each other, cooperation increases significantly. And they've highlighted four reasons why this might be the case. The first is information. Individuals may be able to gather information about the choices others are likely to make, right? So you get to know somebody a little bit. And you can kind of, again, we as humans, we tend to not like ambiguity. We tend to perceive situations as risky when we're uncertain about perhaps what a person will do, right? That we lack information and we lack trust in an individual we're not, with whom we're not familiar. So if we're able to talk to them, we can gather some information about who they are, what they may or may not do, their values, and that tends to um, encourage cooperation. The second thing that communication does is that it gives group members a chance to make explicit commitments about what they will do. So it gives them an opportunity to make a plan, to come together, to have discussions and share their beliefs, which in this case are probably these shared beliefs, these shared values that they're able to discuss them and come up with a plan on what they're going to do and a commitment to each other and perhaps even the cause if this is something that's maybe working more towards like a social movement. The third is I labeled it morality, and it offers an opportunity for moral persuasion. So communication allows people to make appeals to shared values and beliefs. So this moral persuasion on what is considered right and what is considered wrong. And it allows for people to share that information and kind of persuade each other based on these shared values and beliefs. And finally, communication may create or reinforce a sense of group identity. So again, when you're able to communicate with someone and discuss your ideas with somebody, you might find out that you have a lot in common, that you share a lot of the same values, a lot of the same beliefs and goals and desires. And when you're able to do that, it kind of reinforces either one that's existing or creates this sense of shared identity, of group identity, that we are part of the same group because we share these particular ideas or beliefs or values. And the third and final motivational solution is group identity, or focuses on group identity. And so group identity can have such a powerful effect that it can influence rates of cooperation even in the absence of communication, which is really interesting because, again, like in identity theory and social identity theory, they say that merely grouping people together is a very powerful force. But in the research, they found that that's not necessarily the case. They found that people are more willing to exhibit personal restraint in a commons dilemma simply as a result of being identified as members of a common group. But identifying as members of a common group doesn't isn't necessarily like this the catalyzing force behind why people cooperate. But it is something that is very powerful and very important. Is that having this shared group identity, like it says, um, can actually encourage people to exhibit personal restraint. But it also, you can build group norms like the expectation of reciprocity and, what's expected as a member of that group. They've also found that intergroup competition can also promote cooperation within groups. So, competition between groups can encourage um, cooperation within groups. Um, and so think about like maybe on a sports team, right? Maybe if it was just everyone within the group, you're not really going to work together as this cohesive unit when you don't really have like, an adversary or a team that you're competing against in some way. And so the presence of that competition through another group encourages cooperation within your existing group. However, there's kind of the solution can kind of be double edged. So, encouraging or creating group competition can actually it can serve the needs of group members and leaders of those groups. Um, However, the social cost of the conflicts that can result between groups can um, again also cause this high level of conflict and competition. So thinking back to like the robbers cave experiment, it could encourage identifying as a group can encourage cooperation within the group, but sometimes the cost of the conflict between groups is incredibly high. And so, uniting people under shared group identity, like the rest of the solutions we're going to discuss, it has its limitations and it has its considerations. But it's something that they have found is incredibly powerful in terms of encouraging cooperation within a group. So, moving on to strategic solutions. So, strategic solutions assume actors are self interested, and these approaches rely on the ability of actors to shape the outcomes and hence the behavior of other actors. But first, some requirements for cooperation. So, what they found is that there are three requirements in the environment for there to even be the possibility of the emergence of cooperation. So I've labeled these just to kind of help you remember them a bit. The first is a future. So it's essential that individuals must be involved in an ongoing relationship, meaning that, right, we talk about like trust, for example, being incredibly important um, uh, in terms of it de-incentivizes people to behave in a selfish way. And then you have identity. So individuals must be able to identify with each other in some way. So again, having a future with someone and knowing that you're going to exchange with them in the future, it can it can de-incentivize people to behave in ways that are particularly selfish or self-interested. And then individuals, if you identify with others and you see them as part of your group, people tend to be more trusting and behave in more altruistic ways. And then finally, individuals must have information um, about how others, um, about their past behaviors. So again, understanding their past behaviors, so it provides some predictability to the relationship and reduces some of that risk and uncertainty, which of course then fosters trust and cooperation. So we're going to discuss a couple of structural solutions to social dilemmas and collective action problems. The first is, and so there's multiple proposed solutions, and I just chose kind of what I thought were the most interesting among them. The first is called Grimm triggers, and it says that each individual agrees to cooperate only on the condition that all others in the group cooperate. So, in theory, if everybody adopts this strategy, then each person's decision is decisive and free riding is impossible, or at least very much limited. However, research shows that subjects tend to be leery of adopting such a risky strategy because, again, that's depending on what your partners are going to do, what the rest of the group is going to do. How much can you trust them that they will also cooperate? If and only, like, right, like you will join this group and cooperate if and only if others in the group are cooperating. And if others in the group do not cooperate, you will leave the group. So, what's important to note here is that it's something that it depends heavily on interdependence among the group. So, everybody has to keep their promises, so to speak. And then we have group reciprocity. So, the effects of group identity, for example, stem from the interdependence and expectation of reciprocity. So, group reciprocity, of course, first requires that there is a group that exists and that groups share some sort of identity. And while work in social identity theory argues that, like I said, simply categorizing individuals into a common group is enough to increase their altruism towards the group, um, they at the same time argue that the effects of group identity stem not from an altruism born of this like categorization, but actually from the belief in the interdependence of group members and expectations um, of reciprocity among those members. So, in a series of studies, they carefully removed any possibility or connotation of interdependency and found that simple categorization was not enough to create in group favoritism. It is the belief in future reciprocal exchanges between members, they argue, that moderates the temptation to defect and encourages cooperation. And the expectation of in group reciprocity seems to serve as a very deep heuristic that shapes our strategic decisions. And so, as we discussed previously, in terms of humans using heuristics, so it's kind of like this crude system for making decisions, it's somewhat rational but not fully developed. And so, these expectations and these norms kind of provide the foundation for this heuristic that we use to shape our strategic decisions within a group. So, whether or not we decide to reciprocate. And so, moving on to structural solutions. And we've discussed a couple of these in the past, but one in particular I wanted to focus on today is efficacy. And so, if a dilemma is structured in such a way that individuals can have a noticeable effect on the outcome, cooperation rates can actually be increased. And so, as we discussed not too long ago, we discussed that if individuals, like in a neighborhood, if there's some sort of initiative to limit water use, if you show everyone in the neighborhood kind of the average of what their peers are using, people will tend to try to bring their usage close to the average. So you will see people who are outliers on either end kind of come to the middle of where everyone else is. And so just by knowing what other people are doing and then seeing your outcome kind of, in a more immediate way, in a more tangible way, can actually encourage cooperation rates. So, a few examples of efficacy that's been used to address various social dilemmas and collective action problems. And you'll see these a lot. You'll see these used by different charities and nonprofits, as well as other organizations. The first is focused on a threshold. So if you can show people that perhaps, like, look, we're so close to meeting this threshold. We're so close to meeting our goal, our fundraising goal, and that your contribution can be enough to put the group over the top, you're more likely to contribute and cooperate. So at my school, we used to do this thing called like penny wars. And when you see that your group's jar is almost full, like you decide maybe if you hadn't contributed yet, you're more likely to contribute now so that you could push your group over the top. So it encourages cooperation and encourages contribution. And then you have matching. So that would be like doubling the contributions that others make. So if you know that someone is willing to match your contribution, to you that's a huge benefit, that's a huge profit in terms of what you're able to contribute. So let's say you contribute $100 to a charity, um, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's you're working within a group and you're going to contribute 2 hours of your time, but someone says, hey, I'll match whatever you do. um, and so for the $100 somebody matches it and it's $200. You're working, you donate, you give your 2 hours and somebody else gives their 2 hours. And so you're like maximizing your contribution, because again, the person is simply matching what somebody else has contributed. So if you didn't contribute, that person wouldn't, they wouldn't have contributed anything either. So you're more likely to participate and to contribute and cooperate if you know that others are going to match your behavior. And finally, a sense of personal responsibility encourages cooperation and contribution. And so I felt a little uncomfortable showing what I'm actually referring to. I just included one particular charity, Feed the Children. And so what they do is you can sponsor a child, and you can sponsor a child and provide money that will help provide them with like food and water. I assume just for the child, but perhaps even for their family. But you're sponsoring this particular child, and maybe even helping them earn an education. So at any rate, one of the tactics they use that actually increases a sense of personal responsibility and therefore promotes giving and cooperation, is they'll send a picture of the child. They'll send a picture of the child with a bit of background, their name. It gives them an identity, a face, something that you can identify. You can identify with them, because it's not just this kind of vague idea of a child. Here is this picture of this actual child, their actual name, their likes and dislikes, what they enjoy doing in school. here's this child's whole profile, and now I feel personally responsible for making sure that this child gets like the nutrition they need and the education they need, and is provided with better opportunities. And so that's why they do that. That's one of the most powerful tactics, is because it increases people's sense of personal responsibility. Because if you're no longer cooperating or contributing, then you personally let down this child. That solely relies on you, is that you are sponsoring this particular child. It is now your responsibility. And so what efficacy is looking at in terms of these structural solutions is structuring the situation so that individuals um, feel compelled to contribute and to cooperate. So many researchers have argued that one of the key reasons people do not cooperate in an in person dilemma or a multi person dilemma is the fact that a single person's actions may have no discernible effect on the situation. However, if a dilemma is structured in such a way that individuals can have a noticeable effect on the outcome, that is, they can make um, they can make a contribution that they can see, um, that because of this, cooperation rates will increase. So like I said, one way that this can occur is if an individual believes the group is close to a threshold. So then adding your own contribution will put the group over the top. A similar strategy is used in a variety of charities, but also there's like matching grants, for example, in which someone or some organization, or maybe it's even like a coworker, and whatever the case may be, someone who's willing to match your contribution, increases this perception of efficacy, and that can be enough to affect levels of cooperation. And touching again on the last one, is a potential contributor, um, someone who's willing to contribute or wanting to contribute, may fear that their contribution will be wasted, or wonder what good one person can do for an organization that raises millions of dollars for for hundreds and thousands of children. What can one person possibly do to make a difference? And like I said, the response of these organizations has been to assign each contributor a specific child, and the contributor receives a photo and that personal information of the child that they're sponsoring, and even an occasional letter from the child or one of the parents. The sense of personal responsibility it creates profoundly changes the decision of whether the person will cooperate or contribute. So, that sense of personal responsibility. So, when people ask themselves, well, what happens when I stop contributing? And when you're asking yourself that, it's because you feel a sense of personal responsibility. You feel that your contribution matters. And so, that's some of the ways in which efficacy can be used to better understand and to address these social dilemmas and collective action problems. But other than that, that's all I have for you today in this section. I hope you have a great rest of your semester, and a wonderful Thanksgiving break and winter break. So, if I wish you all well. I hope you have a great year. It's getting close to 2021, and I hope when we come back, um, it'll be a better and easier, smoother semester for all of us. So it was wonderful having you guys this semester. I'm sorry that this class isn't, um, we can't do all the things we might want to do in this class and others, I'm sure. Uh, but it has been great. And I think you all have been wonderful. You've adapted so well. And I'm really proud of the work that you've all done. So it was great. And hopefully, I'll see some of you again in the future. Thanks.